Two F-35s are screaming off your wingtip, their missiles live, their intent unknown. You're sitting in coach on a routine flight, clutching a lukewarm coffee, when the pilot's voice crackles with a tremor he can't hide. We are being intercepted. As the cabin descends into a cold, suffocating panic, one woman remains hauntingly still. She knows exactly why they're here. But the real question is, if the sky is bowing to her, who on earth is sitting in seat 12A? The atmosphere inside the cabin has curdled. The soft hum of the air conditioning now sounds like a countdown, and the metallic rattle of the galley seems like the frantic clicking of a Geiger counter. Outside, the two charcoal gray interceptors aren't just hovering, they are vibrating with latent power, their engines letting out a low-frequency growl that ripples through the airliner's fuselage and settles deep in the marrow of the passenger's bones. Elena Vesper Thorne stares at the message on her screen. The system found you. She doesn't breathe. She simply exists in that frozen millisecond where a life of anonymity shatters. Think about the psychological shear of that moment. You spend months scrubbing your fingerprints off the world, learning how to walk without checking your 6, trying to forget the smell of ozone and wet earth, only for the sky itself to reach down and grab you by the throat. The businessman in 12B is no longer just uneasy. He is unraveling. His breath comes in shallow, jagged hitches, the sound of a man drowning in dry air. He watches Vesper's thumb hover over her phone, his eyes darting to the scars on her arm. To him, her stillness isn't discipline. It's the cold indifference of a threat. He grips the armrest so hard his knuckles turn the color of bone, convinced that the metal wings outside are there to stop the woman sitting 6 inches away from him. Is it us? He finally croaks, his voice cracking like dry timber. Are we the target? Vesper turns her head slowly. She doesn't offer a reassuring smile. She offers the truth of a soldier. No, she says, her voice a low, level rasp that cuts through the rising, frantic whispers of the cabin. But the certainty doesn't comfort him. It unsettles him further. Because if the jets aren't there to stop the plane, they are there for something much more specific. What would you do if you realized the safety of 200 strangers was suddenly tethered to your shadow? Vesper pulls her gaze away and reaches for a secure channel on her device, a digital ghost she hasn't touched since she turned in her gear. The connection is instantaneous, the encryption handshake a series of sharp, rhythmic chirps in her ear. Where are you? A voice demands. It's Lieutenant Colonel Maya Siren Vance. There is no preamble. In their world, hello is a waste of oxygen. High Desert Corridor, commercial, being shadowed, Vesper replies. She watches the lead jet execute a subtle, aggressive roll, showing its belly, a display of dominance that only a pilot of a certain caliber would dare in civilian airspace. That's not a standard intercept, Vesper. Siren's voice drops an octave, the sound of a professional realizing the stakes just tripled. I'm looking at the manifest flags now. Your name didn't just pop. It triggered a high-value protective protocol. Someone in Joint Command saw Elena Thorne on a passenger list and hit the panic button. They think you're a liability because of what you carry in your head. Vesper's jaw tightens, a muscle jumping in her cheek. I'm retired, Siren. I'm a civilian. Retirement is a lie we tell ourselves so we can sleep, Siren counters, the sound of frantic typing echoing in the background. The system doesn't see a retiree. It sees a mobile hard drive full of black tier secrets flying in an unhardened aluminum tube. They aren't escorting you, Elena. They're containing you. If they think the plane is compromised, they won't let it land near a city. The gravity of the situation begins to press down on the cabin like G-force. A passenger 3 rows up stands and begins to shout, his voice thick with the smell of cold sweat and terror, demanding to know why the murder machines are so close. A flight attendant tries to intervene, her smile stretched so thin it looks like a scar. The panic is becoming contagious, a fever breaking out at 30,000 feet. Vesper looks back out the window. The fighter jets are no longer maintaining a respectful distance. They are moving in, the spacing so tight that she can see the minute adjustments of the pilot's flight controls. They are flying with a precision that leaves no room for improvisation. It's a cage made of titanium and jet fuel. Suddenly, the cabin's internal radio frequency is overridden. It's not the captain this time. It's a voice from the outside, deep, resonant, and filtered through a tactical headset. It's the lead pilot of the escort, and he's patched directly into the private line Vesper is holding. "Unknown contact in seat 12A, the pilot says, his tone like sharpened steel. "This is Viper 1. We have updated parameters. We cannot verify the integrity of this flight while you remain anonymous. You have 60 seconds to identify yourself by your previous operational callsign, or we are declaring a security deviation. We will divert this aircraft to a restricted military installation by force." Vesper feels the weight of 200 lives shifting onto her shoulders. If she speaks the name, the mask is gone forever. If she stays silent, she becomes the very threat the jets are designed to neutralize. "Identify yourself, Vesper," Siren whispers through the secondary channel. "Do it now." Vesper looks at the businessman, who is now weeping silently, then at the child across the aisle clutching a plastic toy. She closes her eyes, feeling the vibration of the F-35s humming against the glass. "Viper 1, she says, her voice echoing with the ghosts of a dozen wars. "This is Reaper 6. Stand down your aggression." There is a silence on the line, so heavy it feels like a physical blow. Then the pilot's voice returns, but the steel is gone. It has been replaced by a haunting, reverent awe. "Reaper 6, we thought you were a myth." The secret is out. But recognition is a double-edged sword. To see how the cabin reacts when they realize who is sitting among them, you need to see Part 3, The Shadow of the Trident. The moment the call sign Reaper 6 vibrates through the cockpit of the lead F-35, the physics of the encounter shift. Outside, the jets don't pull away. They do something far more unsettling. They drop their combat-ready posture and slide into a tight, obsessive formation, their engines emitting a low-frequency thrum that makes the airliner's window panes shiver in their frames. The aggressive containment has vanished, replaced by a rigid, electric discipline. Inside the cabin, the silence is no longer empty. It is heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. The name Reaper 6 doesn't mean anything to the woman clutching a toddler in 14C, but she feels the change in the atmosphere. She sees the flight attendants freeze, their professional masks cracking to reveal wide-eyed bewilderment as the captain's voice fails to return to the intercom. Think about the psychological weight of that transition. 1 minute, you are a ghost trying to blend into the gray upholstery of civilian life. The next, your past has been broadcast onto a tactical frequency, and the most advanced killing machines in the world are bowing to you at 30,000 feet. Would you feel pride? Or would you feel the cold, oily slick of dread, knowing your cover is gone forever? The businessman in 12B is no longer weeping. He is paralyzed. He watches Elena Vesper Thorne as she lowers her phone, her thumb tracing the edge of the device with a rhythmic, mechanical precision. He sees the way her eyes remain fixed on the middle distance, not looking at the jets, but through them, back toward the dust-choked canyons where that call sign was forged in heat and magnesium light. To him, She has transformed. She is no longer a passenger. She is the reason the sky has gone quiet. 2 rows back, a man in a faded olive-drab cap slowly unbuckles his seatbelt. The click of the metal latch sounds like a gunshot in the silent cabin. He stands up, his movements stiff but deliberate, his back straightening with a muscle memory that age hasn't managed to erase. He isn't looking at the windows. He is looking at the back of Vesper's head, his gaze intense, searching for the warrior's posture he hasn't seen since the fall of the ridge. What would you do in his boots? When you recognize a legend you thought was buried in a classified file, do you stay silent, or do you acknowledge the debt? The narrator must ask, is it possible to truly retire from a life where your name is a standard? Vesper feels the man's eyes on her. She feels the sweat cooling on the back of her neck. She remembers the choice she made years ago, the decision to hold the line in the searing flats while the world turned its back. It was an impossible choice, one that saved hundreds, but left her with a name that she can never truly wash clean. The businessman beside her finally finds his voice, though it is thin and brittle. Who are you? Vesper doesn't turn. She doesn't need to. The answer is unfolding outside. The lead jet, Viper 1, executes a slow, majestic bank away from the wingtip, its afterburners flickering like a dying star before it loops back into a ceremonial V formation. It is a gesture of respect so profound, so out of place in civilian airspace, that it feels like a religious rite. The veteran in the olive cap takes a step into the aisle. A flight attendant moves to block him, her hand raised in a practiced "stay seated" gesture, but she stops mid-motion. She sees the look in the man's eyes, a mixture of grief, recognition, and a sudden, sharp clarity. He doesn't say a word to her. He simply moves past, his boots thudding softly on the carpeted floor. He stops beside seat 12A. The businessman shrinks back into the window, but Vesper remains motionless, her hands folded in her lap like stone. The veteran clears his throat, the sound rough and wet. The entire cabin holds its breath. Every phone is lowered, every whisper dies. The only sound is the roar of the wind against the hull, a distant, howling reminder of the world they are currently suspended in. The veteran doesn't ask for an autograph. He doesn't ask for a story. He slowly raises his right hand, his fingers coming together in a crisp, razor-sharp salute that cuts through the tension like a blade. "I was at the Black Gate," he says, his voice low but carrying to the very back of the plane. "I saw the smoke. I knew you were the only one who stayed." The businessman gasps. The flight attendant's hand goes to her mouth. The truth is no longer a secret. It is a physical presence in the room, suffocating and holy. Vesper's jaw tightens. For the first time, a single tremor runs through her right hand. She is no longer Vesper. She is Reaper 6, and the weight of the trident is back on her chest, heavier than it ever was in combat. Suddenly, the intercom clicks on. It's not the captain. It's the voice of Viper 1, patched into the cabin speakers for everyone to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot says, his voice thick with a gravity that makes the air feel cold. "You are currently flying in the presence of a guardian. We are not here to escort this plane. We are here to witness it." Vesper closes her eyes, the moisture finally threatening to break. She looks out the window as the jets tighten their formation until they are a frame of steel around her window. But as she watches, the lead jet begins to tilt its nose upward, a maneuver that signals the beginning of the end. "Reaper 6, Viper 1's voice returns, sounding like a final goodbye. "Look up. You aren't the only ones who remembered today." As Vesper looks toward the horizon, a second, even larger formation appears through the haze. A fleet of silhouettes that shouldn't be there, moving with a synchronized, haunting grace. The legend has returned to the light. But as the sky fills with ghosts, the question remains, what happens when a secret this big finally touches the ground? To see the final aerial salute, you must watch Part 4, The Sky Remembers. The cabin of the airliner has become a cathedral of stunned silence. The panic that threatened to boil over into a riot just moments ago has been flash frozen, replaced by a weight so heavy it feels as though the plane has doubled in mass. Elena Vesper Thorne sits at the center of this gravity well, her hands still folded, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the second formation is emerging from the haze. Imagine the pressure of 200 pairs of eyes drilling into the back of your head. Every passenger is now a witness to a secret that was never meant to leave the Black Tier archives. The fear has shifted. They are no longer afraid of the jets. They are afraid of the significance of the woman in 12A. Outside, the charcoal-gray F-35s begin their final, high-altitude choreography. The lead pilot, Viper 1, pulls his nose up in a slow, agonizingly smooth climb, his wings catching the dying light of the afternoon sun, turning the jet into a sliver of polished obsidian. Then, he banks hard to the left, leaving a void in the formation. This is the missing man formation, a silent, aerial eulogy usually reserved for the fallen, for those whose names are etched into granite walls. But here, at 20,000 feet, it is being performed for a living ghost. The narrator must ask, how does it feel to watch your own funeral rite performed while your heart is still beating? For Vesper, the sound of the fighter engines isn't a roar. It's a roll call of the names she left behind in the searing flats. The captain's voice returns to the intercom, but the tremor is gone. It has been replaced by a hollow, ringing clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen," he begins, his breath hitting the microphone in a rhythmic, jagged thud. "I have just received word from ground control. We are being cleared for a priority straight-in approach. The escort you see outside, it is not for the aircraft. It is for a passenger among us. We are currently carrying Colonel Elena Thorne, known to the service as Reaper 6. She is coming home." The name Reaper 6 ripples through the cabin like a physical shockwave. People who were strangers seconds ago are now looking at one another with a shared, desperate realization. The businessman in 12B pulls his hands away from the armrest as if it were red hot. He looks at Vesper, really looks at her, and sees not a threat, but the exhaustion written in the lines around her eyes, the way her shoulders carry the invisible weight of 1,000 tons of steel. Think about the psychological toll of being unmasked in a tin can over the desert. Vesper feels the anonymity she spent months building, the quiet trips to the grocery store, the silent mornings on her porch, the blissful lack of a call sign, dissolving like salt in the rain. She isn't a person anymore. She is a symbol. As the plane begins its descent, the air thickens with the smell of ozone and hydraulic fluid. The cabin lights dim, leaving only the ghostly green glow of the instrument panels and the flickering shadows of the jets outside. The descent is steep, purposeful. The airliner isn't just landing, it is being delivered. "Vesper," the voice of Siren crackles in her earpiece. "Ground is locked down. Every bird in the sector is grounded to let you in. They've activated the water salute protocol on the tarmac. You can't run from this one, Elena. The sky won't let you." Vesper's fingers tighten on her phone until the plastic groans. She remembers the last time she was on a tarmac in a war zone. The smell of burning rubber, the frantic shouting over the roar of rotors, the feeling of blood that wasn't hers soaking through her fatigues. She had wanted to leave that version of herself in the dust, But as the landing gear cycles down with a heavy mechanical clunk thud, she realizes the world doesn't allow its monsters or its heroes to simply disappear. What would you do when the doors open and you realize your normal life ended the moment you stepped onto this flight? The plane hits the runway with a jarring impact that rattles the overhead bins. As they taxi, the passengers press their faces to the glass. In the distance, two massive fire engines have moved into position, their water cannons arched high into the air to create a shimmering, translucent tunnel of water, a ritual reserved for retiring captains and returning legends. The airliner rolls beneath the freezing spray. The sound of thousands of gallons of water hitting the fuselage is deafening, a rhythmic, pounding roar that sounds like a final round of applause from the elements themselves. Vesper sits in the center of the noise, her face a mask of stone, though her pulse is visible in the vein of her neck, hammering a frantic rhythm against her skin. The plane slows to a crawl. The engines begin their high-pitched, whining wind-down. For a moment, there is a total, suffocating silence. Then, the lead flight attendant, her hands trembling so much she can barely hold the latch, reaches for the main cabin door. Vesper stands. Her legs feel like lead, but she moves with the grace of a woman who has walked through fire and forgotten how to burn. She steps into the aisle. The veteran in the olive-drab cap steps back, his hand still frozen in a salute. The businessman watches her go, his mouth hanging open, the laptop on his knees forgotten. As the door swings open, the humid evening air rushes in, smelling of jet fuel and rain. Vesper looks out onto the tarmac. She expects a quiet gate. She expects a taxi. Instead, she sees a sea of white and blue. Hundreds of sailors, airmen, and soldiers are lined up in perfect, motionless ranks. There is no cheering. There is only a silence so profound it feels like the world has stopped spinning. And standing at the very front of the line, a single figure in a worn flight suit is holding an object that makes Vesper's heart stop. The homecoming has begun. But not all welcomes are a celebration. To see what is waiting for Reaper 6 at the end of the line, you must watch the finale. Part 5. The Weight of the Shield. The air hitting the open cabin door is heavy with the scent of jet fuel and the metallic tang of a fading desert storm. Elena Vesper Thorne steps onto the air bridge, her worn boots making a hollow, rhythmic thud against the corrugated metal. Behind her, the 200 passengers remain frozen in their seats, watching through the plexiglass as if observing a ghost depart. The businessman in 12B finally exhales, a long, shuddering sound, as the shadow of Reaper 6 leaves his world forever. Think about the psychological weight of this transition. For years, you have been a tool of the state, a phantom in the searing flats. You fought to earn your silence, to become just another face in a crowd. But as Vesper rounds the corner into the terminal gate, she realizes that silence was an illusion. The system never forgets its own. The gate area is a sea of rigid, unyielding uniforms. There is no applause. There are no cameras. This is a military homecoming, and in this world, respect is measured by the depth of the silence. Hundreds of personnel, from high-ranking officers to the youngest technicians, stand at a razor-sharp attention. The only sound is the distant, rhythmic whine of the F-35s outside as they bank away, their mission of containment finally complete. Standing at the very center of the floor is a man Vesper hasn't seen since the extraction in the dust-choked canyons. It is her old team lead, Jax Ironclad Miller. His face is a map of deep-etched lines and scar tissue, his eyes reflecting 1,000 sleepless nights. He doesn't move. He doesn't smile. He simply stands there, his hands clasped behind his back, his breathing slow and mechanical. Imagine standing face to face with the person who left the field with you when everyone else stayed behind. What do you say when words feel like an insult to the memory of the fallen? Ironclad steps forward. The sound of his boots on the polished tile echoes like a hammer. He stops inches from Vesper. The tension in the room is a physical force, a cold pressure that makes the lungs ache. He reaches into his flight suit and pulls out a small, weathered object, a silver trident pin, tarnished by sand and time. He holds it out in his open palm. Vesper stares at the metal. Her hand begins to rise, a slight tremor visible in her fingers, before she clamps them into a fist. To take the pin is to accept the return. It is to admit that the civilian Elena Thorne was a lie. It is to shoulder the burden of the Reaper once again. The next generation is waiting, Elena, Ironclad says, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that carries the weight of a dozen classified folders. They're making the same mistakes we did. They're fast, but they're hollow. They need the shadow to teach them how to survive the light. Vesper looks past him, through the glass walls of the terminal, toward the flight line where the sun is finally dipping below the horizon. She thinks of the classroom, the cold tactical rooms, and the young faces that haven't yet learned the taste of adrenaline and regret. She realizes that her retirement wasn't a peace treaty. It was just a pause. Would you take the shield back? Knowing that it means the end of your peace, knowing that your name will once again be a target for every ghost you've ever created. She reaches out. Her fingers brush the cold metal of the trident. As she closes her hand over it, the entire formation of soldiers exhales as one, a collective release of tension that sounds like the wind through the pines. The transition is complete. The ghost has returned to the machine. Years later, the setting changes. The air is no longer thin and pressurized. It is stagnant and smells of old chalk and floor wax. Vesper, now simply the instructor, stands at the front of a darkened auditorium. Her boots are the same, scuffed and worn, planted firmly on the wooden floorboards. Before her sit 50 candidates, their faces young, eager, and terrifyingly unaware of the cost of the path they've chosen. She doesn't tell them about the F-35s. She doesn't tell them about the missing man formation at 20,000 feet. She leans over the podium, her shadows stretching long against the wall behind her, and speaks the first words of their new lives. "Courage is not loud," she whispers, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "And leadership is never clean. You are here because you think you want to be heroes. I am here to make sure you survive the day you realize you aren't." She turns to the chalkboard, picking up a piece of white dust. She begins to write a list of names, names that aren't on any public record, names that only the Reaper remembers. "Lesson 1, she says, her voice echoing into the hallway. "The mission doesn't end when you come home. It only changes shape." As she writes the final name, she pauses. Her hand lingers on the board. A candidate in the front row raises his hand, his voice trembling with a question that has haunted the elite for decades. "Ma'am, they say you were a myth. They say the sky itself bowed to you. Is it true?" Vesper doesn't turn around. She looks at the names on the board, the ghosts that have followed her from the desert to the classroom. She sets the chalk down with a sharp, final click. "The sky doesn't bow to anyone," she says softly. "It just waits for you to fall." The mission has been passed on, but as Vesper looks at the newest recruit, she sees a familiar flicker in his eyes, a spark that suggests the cycle is about to begin all over again. What happens when the student surpasses the ghost? That is a story for another time.